Welcome back to the Win with Dice podcast, a podcast featuring members of the Win with Dice team, and this week a special guest. Joining me is my co-host Ramon.
If it's your first time listening to the Win with Dice podcast, this is a podcast all about tabletop RPGs. Calvin and I like to take a casual approach to the hobby, so we like to talk about the games that we run and the games that we play in, and the cool, wonderful people that we get to experience the hobby with. If this is your first experience to tabletop RPGs, what are you doing? Go find yourself a table, go have some fun. And if you are a player at someone's table, maybe it's your turn to jump behind the GM screen and run a game for your table.
Indeed. And as I said, this week we have a special guest joining us for the first interview of 2024. A favorite, someone we love to have on the show, Vex.
Hello, party people.
We're very excited to get into talking about Act 1 of In Golden Flame and hopefully hear some interesting tidbits about Act 2. But I know I'm definitely very curious to hear about the reception to Act 1 and how that's been going, and about any feedback you may have gotten from other people who are, playing through this adventure.
Oh yeah, I'm happy to talk about that, yeah.
But before we get into all that fun stuff, we have to get to the most important part of the show, the Win with Dice Weekly GM Tip of the Week.
Yes, the Win with Dice Weekly GM Tip of the Week, brought to you by Calvin. Thanks, Calvin.
So, yeah, this is sort of related to something that I was doing recently in one of my games, and I was coming to it from a player perspective, but Ramon suggested looking at it from a GM perspective, which is just communication, basically talking to your players and asking them, and also, players can just inform their GMs of this, but just what do they want next? What do their characters want to do next? If they have specific ideas of maybe how they want to approach a certain problem, if they have ideas of directions they want to take their characters in. Once you, as the person running the game, has that, you can better integrate it into whatever other story plans you may have, including, if you're running an adventure, if there are certain characters that come up that could be related to something your player wants to do, you can definitely bring those in more. Some of my players are very interested in planning a heist in the near future, so I know the sort of thing I have to have prepared, and they've told me a couple of things that they specifically want to do with that. So I know that, I have to be prepared for these two people maybe having a conversation, so what's this person going to know, and just have like a mental note of that, and, be prepared for that conversation of where that could possibly go.
Yeah. I mean, it's also fun to... as the GM to, incorporate the players' ideas because, it's a collaborative experience, tabletop RPGs. So, just kind of like adding in, it doesn't have to be like the next session or even soon, but like, getting those players' ideas and getting those player feedbacks can really help have the collective storytelling experience. As well, it's kind of fun. I mean, in the pirate campaign, my wife really wanted to like date one of the NPCs because he was goddamn hot, right? He was like the hottest man. So I was like, yeah, okay, we'll do like the whole going on a first date thing. But like at the time, it didn't really make sense, and like basically made her wait like 2 whole arcs until we got to the witch market and finally got that date with that NPC. But, I still asked my players what they wanted, and I delivered, right? So, yeah.
I think there's this stereotype of the player who like writes a 700-page backstory because they want to at some point to this, and it's like, well, if you read like page 304, you'll see that actually I had a lot of contact with the Chantry of Elders at one point, so obviously I would get advantage on this particular role. But like honestly, like I think more of the time when players write you a big backstory, it's like, I want to see bits of this included in the world. I want you to surprise me with characters that I've made up. So like I've always seen that sort of thing as like when players communicate to you like, this is the backstory I have for my character. That's one way of communicating with your GM. It's like, I would like to see this sort of thing in the game at some point.
Yeah, for sure. As somebody who has pretty like my character's backstory gets revealed as I think it up as the game progresses. Definitely, it's a help if you can provide your GM like more of like a thought out backstory. It would help the GM kind of integrate stuff. Calvin does a great job, by the way. Calvin, you do like a really good job of your backstories, and I mine your backstories actively for my campaign. Every time you're in it.
I keep setting myself up to be surprised by stuff.
Yeah, and it's funny because you're always surprised, even though like you wrote it and you're like, what? This dude's here?
Well, I always expect my backstory to stay back there, in the past.
Yeah, the past always catches up, Calvin.
Apparently. Yeah, I also, because I'm running a lot of Pathfinder in a homebrew setting, when I get stuff that I can sort of integrate into that setting, it helps me a lot because I can't write an entire continent or whatever. I can't get that to every minute detail of it. But when somebody suggests something or something comes up during play, then that gives me a space to include that detail. And as we talked about before, especially continuing to play in that setting, that means I can bring it back later and maybe not even in the same campaign with the same group of players. That detail can still exist.
Exactly, yeah. So there you go, folks. There's your tip of the week. Just talk to your players, ask them what they are expecting or what they want, or look at their backstory, ask them for a backstory of their character, as they integrate that into your world, and that's one less thing you got to do as a GM. So there you go. There's the tip of the week.
True. Rely on your players. That's the second secret tip.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into this. I was rereading this recently, so I'm very excited to get into In Golden Flame. Vex, for people who may not have seen the last couple of times we had you on, or maybe haven't read the book yet, do you want to just give an introduction to Act 1 of In Golden Flame and, let people know what it's about?
So, In Golden Flame is a pre-written campaign module for the Lancer tabletop role-playing system, which is about giant mechs in the utopian socialist space future. And it explores kind of the less utopian part of that space future, in that it takes place in a backwater system that nobody lives in by choice. And you kind of have to defend your weird found family and your crummy space station from an apocalypse cult that wants to destroy the solar system.
Yeah. There's a lot of... I really enjoyed this book I think the main reason, the one we talked about a whole lot, was Jerry.
Jerry, yes.
The ultimate example of do it for him.
Do it for him?
Yeah.
If I can just hop in here on the subject of Jerry. Back when the first Avengers movie came out, its director, Joss Whedon, who, he has some issues, but he did say one thing about the production of the original Avengers movie, which is about that iconic shot where the camera pans around the Avengers as they're all getting ready for a fight with a bunch of space weirdos. And he said, if we don't get that shot, the movie doesn't work. And I don't think you should hinge an entire movie on one shot going right. But he was correct. I don't think the Avengers would have worked without that shot. And by the same token, if people don't like Jerry, I don't think In Golden Flame works.
Yeah.
And I was absolutely delighted that everyone seems to have had the same reaction to Jerry that I wanted them to. Jerry was an absolute success. I had one person say, I don't actually very much care for Jerry. And it's out of the hundreds of people who've given me feedback on this, it's that's great that I only have one person who was Jerry, could take him or leave him. But I also find that fascinating. It's I want to study this one person in particular.
Yeah, maybe there's a Jerry in their lives, and they're it's okay. This one isn't as good as the one that I
one Jerry
know.
Maximum.
Yeah, right. He's
There's
all
a
Jerry
limit.
now. That's really cool. That you could kind of sum up the feelings of the whole situation as oh God, you have to help Jerry because Jerry needs the help.
If you don't complete this mission successfully, Jerry will cry.
Which is the worst
exactly,
possible
right.
outcome.
Yeah,
I just like that Jerry is in some ways a bundle of nerves that's ready to explode at any point, but still shows up every day and puts the work in. And I just really like that idea of just representing the the whole of the gate setting. And I don't know, I just really like that sort of basis for the NPCs there, especially I don't want to say too much about the last part of Act 1, but it comes together in a certain way that I really like.
Yeah, and I think that the way Jerry's written is like, you can see a lot of everyone can see a lot of themselves in Jerry. Like I don't know what the demographic is of people playing the module, but I have a strong feeling that they're adults going to their day jobs, being like, why am I here? Oh shit! But I still gotta show up, right? Like people.
If I don't do it, no one else is going to.
Yeah, but if I don't do it, no one's gonna do it. Like it's easy to relate.
I think I saw a Tumblr post that summed up Jerry almost perfectly, which was, I feel like I want to scream very bad right now, but I'm being so calm and normal about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, speaking of love for Jerry, I know there's a bunch of things that we want to get into in this episode, specifically like the response and feedback you may have gotten after the release of Act 1. I don't know if there's any particular elements of that you want to get into, or if people have talked about, actually running it and whatever experiences they had with their players.
Yeah, like, one of the best parts for me has been seeing how people have taken my story and changed little bits of it. I get people like, there's two whole channels on PilotNet. There's the one where there's the one full of spoilers where I just drop what I'm like, whatever I'm doing for development today in it, and then there's like the actual feedback channel, which is mostly spoiler free, of people who've bought the game and are playing it and are telling me, I liked the bit you did in Mission 2 where like the fight with the fight with the anti-capital missile corvette. You're fighting something that is meant to fight capital ships in tiny little fragile mechs while you're in zero gravity space, having to dodge around the support struts of a space station. People loved that fight. People loved the fight. That, but like I've also really liked seeing the bits that people change, the bits that people add or that they take away, and seeing how like I've put all of the components out there for the story. Like I have the module write up, but then people run the story and then they change bits. They add new characters. They change the relationship between characters. They change entire characters' backstories. One of the first people back when back before I think this was back before I even did the first interview with you guys. Someone sent me their setting document for Calliope, and they changed a bunch of stuff, and it was fascinating. Like it didn't like people have been like, does it worry you that people change your story, that people like change elements of it? And like, no, that's fascinating to me. I like to see what people change. And this person had they had made the whole home station, Hell's Gate, a subsidiary of Impact Dynamics, the extremely nefarious food corporation. So you were actually just a subsidiary of the bad guys. And they'd also put like weird space weather into the system. Like Hell's Gate was constantly plagued by snowstorms of like ice particles in the orbit of the gas giant. That if it didn't fire its engines on time, it would lose orbital velocity, and hell would literally freeze over and fall into the gas giant. And I thought what a genius thing. Like, I guess the only bad feeling with some of the stuff I see people doing is like, I wish I'd thought of that. That's so cool.
Yeah, but they could. It's like, okay, you like climb most of the mountain. There's like a meter to go, and they're just like, oh yeah, I'll do the meter. So it's fine. I think people adding onto RPGs and stuff like that, not playing it exactly the way it is the point, right? Like you got them most of the way there, and they're just adding the spice to the dish you've already like created, right?
Yeah, but like they're also switching out ingredients and like cooking it for a different time, and like it's fascinating to see like over the God, has it been 3 years I've been writing this now? Jesus Christ. I think it's closer to 2.5, but over the 2.5 years I've been writing this, like I've become very familiar with the universe, as I guess one would hope. But it's like, it's fascinating to see something I'm so familiar with become new and different again. And I think that's one of the things I really love about writing for tabletop, is that because it is collaborative storytelling by definition, everyone will tell the story differently. And as I've said as much in the introduction to the book, that this is based on a campaign I was a player in. And this is ultimately me retelling a story that I was told. So seeing that story retold, and then like, see, because I've got like a friend of mine, shout out to Ada, who's part of my writing team now, who I will talk about that later. Ada is running a game of this, and now one of her players is running a game of their own, and I think that's really cool that we've got like, I guess that's like, you know, like 4th generation retelling of the story now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And everyone has different ideas on how to portray the characters, like how sympathetic the characters are. Like, because one of the characters in the story is the character that I played in that original game, and seeing how people portray them, you know, my personal character, seeing how people like portray them as cool or really annoying, that's fascinating to me. I love that. So, I think the best, easily the best part of the feedback has just been like hearing how people interpret the work. That's really cool to me.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of nice that, you know, you get to see your work evolve, right? And all the little like nuances that everybody adds every time it's been played, right? Like the player in like your writer's game who's running a game, their player might run the game, and you know, who knows how it's gonna turn out, or like even like the context of like is like where they put this game, or if they take those characters and go do something else, right? It's so interesting.
Something that Dragon Kid suggested in his video on IGF was that you could ignore everything after the setting chapter. Like there's the whole sort of like player safe, doesn't contain any spoilers, welcome to Calliope section of the first book that just details the setting in you know, like goes into the technology and the culture of it. And Dragon Kid pointed out that you could just take that and run an entirely different game in Calliope. And I want to hear about that, because I want to hear about, you know, the game in the setting that I've detailed that doesn't follow any of the story that I've detailed, because I think that would be fascinating.
Yeah, because, you know, obviously you set everything up, right? All the dominoes up, and then the players get to choose, or like the GM gets to choose, like, what is the problem, right? Like, where's the problem the players need to solve in the system? And that's really cool. Yeah.
I the one thing I was really curious about going into this, and now that you've already answered it, was the sort of just hearing about how people have adapted this thing that you've written and their different perspectives or different takes on it. I think it's very funny just hearing, you know, different people's interpretations of your own character that you've played. Because that's definitely a character that people could have, I think, different impressions of. So yeah, I just found that really interesting. That was actually a question I did want to ask, but you've already covered it.
Well, I remember, there's something we didn't have a word for until Across the Spider-Verse came out. But like, there seems to be canon events in IGF campaigns. Like the final boss of the first chapter. It seems to be a canon event that, like, on his first structure roll, he loses a weapon.
Oh, that's funny.
Like the pirate boss will lose his flamethrower. Like, that's a canon event now. I actually, it came up so much in playtesting that I actually had to give him an extra weapon so that, like, losing his flamethrower on the first structure, which always seems to happen for some reason, doesn't just dumpster the whole fight.
Yeah.
Because he now has a weapon, you know, he now has a sacrificial weapon that he can lose. But like, that seems to be a thing that happens in an unusually large number of games.
Yeah, that's kind of funny. I do like that there's canon events now. Like,
Just
like
a set point in time.
Yeah, just imagine all of the Miles Moraleses just being like, and then he loses his flamethrower right here, like.
So something, because we did talk before this about other topics you did want to cover. Something I wanted to hear you expand on was how the tone and writing evolved, because you did mention that, and I was wondering what you meant by that. Because you did mention being cautious about being too silly. But I kind of feel like, people, obviously, they want that silly, they want that fun, so I was wondering if you wanted to expand on that.
So, the first, campaign module that was released for Lancer was, No Room for a Wallflower. And I think No Room for a Wallflower is good, but it is very, very heavy. It is, it is dark. It deals with the aftermath of genocide, themes of colonialism, the destruction of the environment inherent in war. A lot of people die in Wallflower. A lot of bad things happen, and there's occasional moments of levity, but it is. I don't want to say it's not fun, but it's. There's not very much levity in it. It's kind of.
I would call it it's like something that's it's not the easiest thing to go down, but it's also like super nutritious. It's like,
oh yeah,
it'll make you deal, it'll make you think and deal with a lot of ideas that hopefully is not so present in your life, because that stuff is hard. But it's a cool place to explore. To be fair, Calvin hasn't. I haven't ran Wallflower for Calvin, so I don't want to spoil too much for him.
I mean, you can talk about it if you want. I will try to close my ears or refresh my brain a bit. Wallflower is one of the things that I'm sure other people may have this list of adventures that they want to play, but they don't want to read. Or maybe that's just me. Yeah, no, because I hear so many things about it that I want to experience it as a player, so I've been kind of just waiting for Ramon to run it.
But I bring up Wallflower because I was like, well, this is Wallflower was my only reference at the time I was first writing IGF Act 1. So I was like, okay, so this is what I have to reference from. And obviously I didn't want to just recreate Wallflower. I wanted to do my own thing, but I was referencing it, and I was like, okay, so this is what players. I mean, this is as the only existing 5-chapter campaign module that currently exists for Lancer. This is what players will be. This sets the benchmark essentially, and I was like, okay, so I'm writing something that is closer in tone to Borderlands. But I don't want to get. How silly am I allowed to get with it? And I remember saying back during the last interview that I initially went too serious because we were on basically a space station in Chapter 2 that's Space Las Vegas, and I was setting fights in kind of rather boring industrial areas. And one of the people who was sort of running a campaign based off of my playtest materials came to me. I think that was Strunmouse, and he said, "Hey, we're on Space Las Vegas. Could we set this somewhere more interesting than a warehouse?" And I was like, "Yeah, we could do that." And he was like, "What if you set it at a theme park or a rave?" And that was shout out to Strunmouse. Saved an otherwise extremely boring fight and made it into one of the most hilarious ones I've written, because I just set a fight at a theme park and I made all of the enemy mechs security mechs that were disguised as mascots. So you had mechs that were dressed up as bridge trolls, and eventually one of my artists just drew the Bastion as, oh yeah, he's a bridge troll and his shield is an actual piece of bridge. And it was one of the most standout, in instant, without changing anything really mechanical, except adding these sort of battlefield flourishes, like the Ferris wheel that you can roll at people. without changing very much about the fight, it was interesting. It was more interesting and fun just from the absurdity of where it was set. And I didn't have the opportunity to do all that much with the rest of the campaign because it wasn't set in such that's something I'll get into later about designing the fights before I design the story. I'll explain that in a minute. But it was like in the rest of the chapters, I didn't really have all that much opportunity to set fights in fun and weird places. And now in Act 2, I think I have way more opportunity to just set fights in absolutely bizarre places. And players told me that they liked the tone. Like they liked the fact that it's silly, that it's, and I think my fundamental way of describing the tone of In Golden Flame is a serious story told in a very unserious world.
Yeah, that fits. I can see that.
So now in Act 2, I'm like setting fights on the hailfire plains of Mroz, where there's lakes of liquid acetylene and like there's geothermal activity next to frozen carbon dioxide snow, and there's this fight on basically an aerostat city, like a floating city in the sky of a Venusian planet very close to the sun, where you're fighting against a bunch of poison-themed pirates called the Bleach Boys. And then, then when you're fighting the billionaire, who is absolutely not a straw man of any existing billionaire, I promise, you fight. One of the fights is set in a giant mall.
Oh.
And basically you're fighting you're fighting against mecha cops in the world's largest shopping mall. And that's the sort of just like ridiculous energy that I want to bring to Act 2, because the story is still very serious, but the people involved in it and the places that you go may not be.
Yeah, like these are like I was gonna say these are real places where real people live, right? Like the idea is like, yeah, there should just be like a big mega mall somewhere, right?
Yeah.
But it's just like, but then now there's a giant robots and everyone's fighting, and the cops had to show up and deal with them. And they're giant cop robots. Like,
because why wouldn't they be?
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, you said that, it's a serious story in like an unserious world, and I was like, that's kind of like One Piece. It's like a pretty serious story in a very unserious world, like where everyone is drawn all goofy and yell out attack names and stuff like that, and dudes are turning into all sorts of animals and stuff. So it's like, but it's still a story about like slavery and like the upper class controlling everything, and like, the horrors of like that kind of world and like being oppressed. Right, the One Piece is very much a story about freedom for the people and upending a system one punch at a time kind of deal, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think like from a player perspective, like you can sort of explore those ideas and approach them in maybe a safer way, like through a game like this. But at the same time, you also have that fun. I think people are like inherently going to be making jokes and having a bit of fun at their tables when they're playing. So having that as something that's present in the setting, I think makes it easier and maybe more comfortable to do that when dealing with certain topics.
I think another thing that like let me feel a little bit more confident about being silly with it is since like I got done with the most of the writing on IGF Act 1 and started full scale on Act 2, Dustgrave by Ralph came out.
Right. And
that is, I would say, like, it's somewhere between like the serious, like it's somewhere I think it's closer, in my opinion, it's closer to my sort of silliness than it is to Wallflower's very seriousness. But I think it's somewhere in between. But it does have a pasta chef who just runs a lasagna place called Garfield's. And the guy who runs the print shop is like the post-death homunculus AI of the dude who ran it. And because the AI kind of just amplifies all of the traits that were very public about him, so he's now just a ridiculously slimy used car salesman, but for like printers.
That's so funny.
And then one of the bandits is just just full Borderlands bandit type, just like yelling at you in an absolutely unhinged voice. And then even the serious parts have this sort of, I don't want to spoil anything about Dustgrave because it is a really good piece of work. But even the more serious villains are really over the top. They're not played as funny exactly, but they are larger than life.
Yeah. And
having Dustgrave out there made me feel more confident in just getting silly with it. And that the feedback the feedback from players was, yeah, we like the tone, so I felt confident in pushing that. But then also there's this other product that is similar in tone in some ways. And that makes me feel like I'm not alone in being silly sometimes. And Lancer inherently is kind of silly, right?
Yeah,
it's
most definitely.
Mecha fiction as a genre is actually kind of silly. Even the most serious and dark Gundam, you have to laugh a little bit because they're fighting in giant people-shaped robots. That's kind of silly, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the actual act of the fighting is kind of silly, but the idea of what they're fighting for in the situation of the space politics, it's oh, this seems kind of bad. Yeah, people shouldn't be doing this, right? It's always something. Actually, to be fair, even some of the context, some of the Gundams, I'm what is happening right now? I forget which one it was. There was one where there's a bunch of economic blocks and they all use clean energy. And then they basically oppressed all of the the oil states to not produce oil. And then that's where the conflict was, right? That was it. And I was this is inherently kind of stupid because economic wealth can just be shared. It's fine. It's green energy. That's the point, right? Dumb. But yeah, I get what you're saying. And also too, in the Lancer rules themselves, the some of the texts are I guess the flavor texts are just kind of fun little sci-fi nonsense, right?
I always like the flavor texts where it's just an ominous out of context quote that explains absolutely nothing about what the system does.
Yeah.
It's just Tom and Miguel's way of saying, heads up, this is extremely fucked.
Yeah. We're gonna get weird with it. You can get weird with it. We give you free license. Just.
Yeah, I appreciate the weirdness of the setting. I also think it's really cool that now that there's more adventures being written, more stuff being written for Lancer, that it is going to have all these different tones, these different settings. I think it's a really good time to maybe hop on that game for people who might not have tried it. Because there's probably something out there that is going to fit the sort of game that you might want to run with this setting, the sort of ideas that you might have. I see a whole lot of different ideas and things coming up in sort of the indie development space for Lancer. Because I was looking at the itch.io page and the drive-through pages recently, and it feels like there's more different things going on there than maybe some of the more stereotypical adventures that you might see in other games.
Yeah. Someone actually asked me recently about, hey, you wrote a Lancer module. Do you have any media recommendations for writing mecha fiction? That's one of the sort of nice little upshots of having released this thing, was that people ask me for writing advice sometimes now, which I think is kind of cool. People think that I'm good enough at writing that they ask me for advice, which is gratifying. I like that. But I actually realized that, I'm sorry if I can go off at a slight tangent.
Absolutely.
Yes.
If you want to write good mecha media, watch media, read books, watch films, play video games that are not related to mecha. I think, obviously you should have a little bit of grounding in the sub. Watch Neon Genesis Evangelion by all means. Watch Gundam. I recommend Hathaway if you're. I really need to watch Witch from Mercury, but Hathaway was very good. Specifically the scene where they are on foot in the middle of combat between two Gundams. It is harrowing and terrifying to see what all of those cool weapons look like from the ground.
Yes. The shell casings, just their movement boosters, how that just tears up everything, and you just have no choice because you are a very small human being.
Yeah.
It brought the silliness, it took away the silliness of a bipedal robot shooting a rifle, and was oh, this is a machine of war. The people are dying regardless of whether or not they're being attacked.
Well, I mean, with that's fundamentally, it's yes, it's a silly thing, but they're committing to, they're not being ironic about it. They're committing to the idea of their setting. It's okay, yeah, giant robots are kind of silly, but that's the price of admission for this setting. You accept that giant robots are a weapon of war and people use them. Now look at what they do to places. And I think that's great. But my general advice for writing good mecha fiction is have a grounding in fiction that is not mecha. My biggest inspirations for IGF were Borderlands, which it features mecha, but it's not about mecha. Letterkenny, which is a Canadian sitcom about being in rural Ontario. The works of Loading Ready Run, who are another Canadian comedy troupe from Victoria. The Outer Worlds. And Hard Space Shipbreaker, which is just about salvaging old spaceships. None of this really heavily features mecha. And I really wish I could find the person who first said this, because I really would like to credit them for this quote instead of just repeating it. But, someone said that Star Wars is best when it's looking at something else through the lens of Star Wars. The original trilogy was about either World War II or the Vietnam War, depending on who you ask. You can see some elements of an examination of, the Bush administration in the prequel trilogy. Andor, which I think is... I think, for my money, Andor is the best piece of Star Wars media. Andor is essentially being the French resistance in Vichy France. And a reason why the sequel trilogy kind of feels a little bit empty is because it's Star Wars examined through the lens of Star Wars. It's sort of...
Yes.
Self-derivative, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Now that you position it that way, it brought a lot of context to me personally, because Star Wars examining itself, through Star Wars, which was probably too many layers deep for it to work, right? Because that's such a crazy quote. That whoever said that.
Yeah, I really wish I knew who they were, because I don't want to I don't want to take credit for that. That's not my work. That's not my insight. But that's an insight I operate under, but it's not my insight, and I really wish I knew who first said that, because it's great. But we were speaking about Gundam.
That's actually the...
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was gonna say, honestly, that brings a lot of long-running media franchises, because sometimes I think they just double back into themselves, and then that's when things get bad, right? I'm starting to feel like all of the ones who are like all of the new releases of long-running franchises have been doing that. They've been folding back in on itself in not a good way. I think that you're going to mention Gundam, but Gundam actually doesn't do that, surprisingly.
Well,
but I think...
Well, my point about Gundam was that there was one Gundam that did kind of, like, examine its own universe, but it was... and this is the genius of it. It was Gundam Unicorn. It was a Gundam story about the dangers of examining your own lore, because like the main villain is just a clone of the villain is literally a clone of Char Aznable, the villain of the original series.
Yeah,
literally a clone with his memories, expecting to just create another like military and political genius like Char Aznable. And the thing is that like Gundam Gundam examining Gundam warned about the dangers of cannibalizing your own lore, and like I thought that was a stroke of like transcendent genius. It's like, yeah, you can't just put all of the same pieces together and expect to get the same thing again, because we've already had that thing. Like. I could have done without them calling him full frontal. I don't know why they chose to do that, but sure. Like, Gundam Unicorn was great. I loved Gundam Unicorn. But, like, I think that was a complaint that people had about The Mandalorian, that the first 2 seasons were very much just the Star Wars take on Lone Wolf and Cub, and then season 3 has been kind of like, the Star Wars take on Star Wars again.
Yeah.
I can kind of see that. Yeah. That's not an unfair thing to say.
Yeah.
But like, I think that if you're going to write mecha media, you should bring something to the table that's not been done in mecha media before. Like, if you're writing for Star Wars or if you're writing for Cyberpunk, just like bring something to the table that hasn't been examined already. Because even the inspirations for like the seminal piece of Western fantasy literature, like Lord of the Rings, it's not direct, but some of the themes in Lord of the Rings, and this was pointed out by Matthew Colville, so I can't take credit for this, but I at least do know who pointed this out, that it was a point, like it was making a point about how he felt about World War II essentially just being, because Tolkien fought in World War I, and then he had to watch World War II happen. And I can't imagine how that must have felt. Just like seeing all of this play out again. And Matthew Colville made the point that Elrond is kind of like talking about, I was there in the First Age when we did all of this shit the first time. So even like the seminal piece of Western fantasy literature, like, is in some ways examining things outside of itself. And I think if you're going to write good mecha fiction, just like bring weird stuff to the table, like look at the pieces of media that inspire you in a general sense. Like part of IGF is me loving the Borderlands series, but also having issues with the way it writes.
Yeah, definitely. I think that makes sense in any sort of writing or expression of art. I mean, I think there's a thing to say of executing very well. Like the execution part of it, of like replicating something, is like in itself a good thing. But I think the idea of art is to kind of add in your own personal experiences to what you're trying to not reproduce, but like the culmination of your experiences, right? So I mean, like, yeah, everyone's going to like, it's same thing with when people run in Golden Flame, right? It's like they will take what you've written and add their own stuff to it, right? Take out the parts that they see, like, maybe this isn't for me, and add in the parts that they do. But overall, it's kind of like a more of a conversation. I think you should think of like writing as like a conversation, being like, what do I have to say about this? Even if you're saying that, you're gonna go fight some goblins, but like, what about these goblins to you needs to be said, right? Or whatever.
Definitely. And like, I guess I've always known to a certain extent, but like, something that really crystallized for me is that I have a certain like image in my mind's eye of how everything looks, and nobody is going to share that. Everyone, when they read my book, it might be subtle. They might have similar images, but no one's image of the setting that I've laid out is going to be the same as mine. And they will always run the setting from that image in their mind's eye, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, similar to what you were talking about before. Just how people are going to experience it differently.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's also something to be said just, for bringing in elements from stories that take place in different, genres or settings into your writing or into your tabletop games, because that can just sort of introduce narrative elements that aren't usual for that genre as well.
Like, I think whatever was going on in Neon Genesis Evangelion was not normal in it was not normal in mecha fiction before that. I don't think it was. I don't think it was normal at any point, but it was definitely not normal in mecha. Like before Neon Genesis Evangelion, we did not, I think, have weird flesh mechs.
Not explicitly, I don't think, but like, that was. I always imagine, because I do every time I recommend someone take a look at that series, is like, I preface like, you will probably not enjoy it, but it is definitely an encapsulation of the time that this was being creative and of the people who are creating it. Like, it is 100% that, I think, first, and then some cool, awesome mecha shit afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And without it, we wouldn't have Horus, so...
Also
could you imagine? Yeah, could you imagine a world without that? Yeah.
I don't want to.
Toes and all. Like.
Something else that you did mention is the expansion and contraction of the possibility space as a story progresses.
Oh, right, yeah. So, Act 2 has a kind of more freeform design to it. So, like, in Act 1, you had Mission 1, and you did Mission 1, and then you did Mission 2, and then Mission 3, and Mission 4, and Mission 5, and the fights were always in that, like, there's an order to the fights, and you always went through these specific missions in that order, and those fights in that order. And in Act 2, I'm doing something experimental. Well, it's experimental for me, at least. I'm sure someone else has done it before. But there's just a bunch of problems that the system is facing right now. And you can kind of tackle them in any order. There's four missions that you actually do in Act 2, but there are 5 missions in the book. There will only be time to do 4 of them. And so you actually have to choose, like, which problems are your priority to deal with. And then the problems that you didn't deal with this go round will get worse. Like, the problems that are facing the system progressively get worse as you don't deal with them. So you really have to prioritize, like, because there's several new factions that have shown up in the system, and they are preventing you from, like, all of the problems that they are causing are preventing you from dealing with the main the problem that you really need to be dealing with, which is the cult.
Right.
The cult have kind of, after the events of Act 1, they've kind of gone to ground and holed up in a place that you can't just blow up, because that's what they want you to do. So you kind of need to launch a conventional assault on it, but you would need an army for that, which you don't have at the moment. No matter how powerful your players might be, they can't do this on their own. They need the support of an army. And that's a problem, because the Calliope is not really in a state to produce an army right now. Fortunately, a bunch of outsiders have shown up, and they each have like a pretty substantial military force backing them up. So if you can like convince them to help you by essentially just doing their work for them and solving their problems, they will, lend support to your cause. But they all have their own complicated issues that you need to deal with. Like, Harrison Armory have shown up, and they're doing weird. They're kind of lurking at the edge of the system, doing weird stuff with space-time, and also arresting dissenters. SSC have shown up above one of the planets that you haven't visited yet, and they are searching for something and threatening anyone who tries to find out what they're searching for. Impact Dynamics, who you've already had problems with in the first act, they're run by that billionaire. They're basically trying to starve the system into submission. And then there's these weird people, like there's this weird entirely new faction called the Kingdom Aniline, who have shown up and are looking for one of the heirs to their kingdom who ran away from the battle royale that basically they clone their rulers. And then they make all of the clones fight each other to work out who the next king will be. And one of the clones has gone missing and ended up in Calliope. So they're looking for him while threatening another settlement that you're allied with. So basically, you have all of these 4 factions who are quite militarily powerful, but not currently on your side and causing serious problems. And so you need to resolve those issues before you can, get down to the business of dealing with the cult. And you can handle these 4 factions in any order, but the problems will get worse as you progress through the act. And also, so that's kind of like a more open-ended structure of, you can deal with Harrison Armory first, or you can deal with Impact Dynamics first, or SSC. But, the problems will get progressively worse. And also, within, these individual missions, there are different people that you can... ally with to solve problems in different ways. And kind of what I wanted to create with this is a narrative structure where one group of players will say, okay, so we went to Harrison Armory and we allied with the scientist, and then that got us doing a prison break. And then there's another group of people. It's we did the Harrison Armory mission, but we actually we did the part of the mission where you steal a ship from the cultists and you perform a false flag attack on Harrison Armory so that their leader can declare emergency powers. And it's then there's another player group who will be we didn't do the Harrison Armory mission. We had to ignore that because there were other things that we valued more, and that kind of spiraled into disaster. And so there's a lot of variance in what players are capable of doing and what options they can pick. And the great thing about Lance's the way it handles encounter difficulty is that basically the encounters are essentially throughout a tier essentially kind of the same difficulty. So it doesn't necessarily matter in what order. I had a lot more freedom designing the fights this time because it doesn't... Because I expect that players who have gotten to this point have a fair understanding of how Lancer works.
Yeah.
We've been playing for 5 missions now, so they probably understand the basics of building mechs, and they're probably familiar with most of the NPC types that have been introduced. So they're not coming up against an operator and saying, "What the fuck is that? It can teleport? It does how much damage a turn?"
It explodes? What?
But another thing that has changed with the way I have been designing fights is I design the fights first and then make the story fit around them. Because I realized that, like, what people are fundamentally coming to Lancer for is, like, yes, the story, but, like, there's so many tabletop systems that, like, have good stories. But, like, what people come to Lancer for is the really cool mech combat.
Yeah, right. Like I think I always say too is like if you look at your rulebook objectively, how many pages are dedicated to what, right? Like how many pages are dedicated just to these are all the cool things you get to do in your mech, right? So therefore the majority of the fun in this game is probably in your mech.
Yeah. So in Act 1, the problem that I had was that I was designing the story first and then being like, oh shit, I gotta put like 3 fights in here. And like that led to one of the fights in Mission 4, which I still think is a pretty good fight, if I do say so myself, but it was kind of just shoehorned in. It was just like, well, like, I gotta have 3 fights. I gotta have 3 fights in here. How am I gonna get 3 fights in here? Just like, I guess I'll just put a holdout in here. And it turned out pretty good. But like, I was dissatisfied that I kind of just had to be like, okay, well, a fight needs to happen here, so I will just work out an excuse for a fight to happen. And then I was designing fights around, like, the needs of the plot, when in Act 2, what we've been doing is designing we have a general idea of the plot. We have a general idea of, like, what goes on in each mission. But then we design the fights, and we put all of the NPC types in there, and we like, so what is going on here? And like, how do we write the narrative to connect these fights? And that, like, doing it mechanics first, not only has made it, like, way easier to put enough fights that don't feel like filler, it's actually helped me write. Because, like, now I know where the players have to be. And I know where they, like, what they have to do and who they've been fighting recently. So that's been a real help with, like, just that sort of, like, that's one of the lessons I learned from Act 1, and if I could go back and do it all again, I think that's how I do it. I would write the fights first and then structure the plot around them, because you do play Lancer to make the mechs shoot each other.
Yeah. I think that for this game specifically, all of the success I've had doing like homebrew stuff is figure out the fights first and then backtrack and be like, what is the reason that these fights need to happen? I think that, like, if you could nail the fights down, the reason why the players are there to fight, it matters, obviously. And if the story is good, it's great. But they're here to fight with giant robots because they saw the cool art and was like, yes, this is it. This is what I want to do this Saturday, like, or whatever, right? It's like, I'm here to shoot lasers and cut people up with cool giant mech swords. But we get to have a cool, awesome story and talk to awesome NPCs at the same time. Awesome, I'm in. Like, that's just gravy. Like.
And we've actually, like, through designing these fights, we have actually invented new characters that have, like, one example is in the SSC mission. I talked earlier about a fight on an aerostat platform in the sky of a Venusian planet where you're fighting against these guys called the Bleach Boys. We came up with that as, like, those were just fights, and we were like, let's have a fight that's themed around burn, but it's not fire, it's like corrosive chemicals. And it's like, we could invent, like, a whole new, like, minor pirate faction around this. This sounds fun. And then we invented their leader, who, I'm very confident that people will love this guy. So, like, all members of the Bleach Boys take the call sign of a poisonous or venomous animal, like the red knee tarantula or the Irukandji octopus, or like the bombardier beetle, and then this guy, like this leader who is just like a massive dork, just like invented an entire animal that he insists was a real thing called the Mega Corroder.
Whoa.
Like, this dude, like, everyone has a cool, edgy name, like Trapdoor, or, like, Funnel Web, or, like, Deathstalker. But this guy is Mega Corroder, and he is such a nerd. Like, his page quote, like, the thing is, like, he's a pirate, but he has never killed anyone in his life, because he finds the idea of killing someone just, like, too mean. So his page quote is, "Enough messing around. If you don't have my money by next week, my next lecture will be 10 minutes long."
Oh no.
I have literally had one of my writing team pitch it as like, what if Jerry was evil? And like that's a character that we came up with by going mechanics first, because it was like, wait, this guy, like, anyone who would call himself Mega Corroder and like fight in this sort of mech must be like weird, right? And I was like, yeah, he probably is. And so we came up with this guy, and then while we were writing the Kingdom Aniline bit recently, we came up with this guy, the fated bodyguard, who basically in the weird sort of very very unusual society of the Kingdom Aniline. So he basically, they have this order of like. I don't want to make it so obvious, but they're kind of like the Bene Gesserit, that kind of like, they are precognitives, and he saved their life, like he saved the life of one of them, and they basically offered him any boon that was theirs to bestow, and being young and foolish, he's like, tell me the most glorious event that will ever happen in my life. And so she looks at him and she says, okay, in exactly 61 years, you're going to die in a system called Calliope to the finest warriors of hell.
Ooh.
And like she doesn't understand. She doesn't understand this. Like even as she's saying this prophecy, she doesn't understand what it means. But he's like, oh shit, like, and also she tells him like, yeah, it's going to be in 61 years, but you're only going to be 31 years old when it happens. And so, like, you know, there's like relativistic time dilation involved. So, like, this dude has been, like, and, you know, this dude gets a prophecy at the age of 18 that he's gonna die at 31. And, like, the knowledge of, like, living with your days are extremely numbered, you will die young, and it will be and, like, nothing you do in your life will ever be as glorious as your death. So the thing is that he's kind of like, he's carved out this short but like quite promising career of, well, like, he's destined to die at this point, and he will die in battle. So he literally cannot die until then, and he cannot take a serious injury until then. So he's been in like a dozen duels and never lost. He's never lost a single fight, because he never can. And then he gets to Calliope, and he meets the characters, he meets the players in person. And he's like, alright, cool. Very soon, hi guys, the name's Lucas Acedanos. Very soon you're going to kill me. Would you like to have a drink?
Oh,
Interesting.
that's wow.
And so, you're just running into this guy who's like, yeah, heads up, I'm gonna die soon and you're gonna be responsible. And this is just fate. This is just what will happen. And like, he whether or not that's true is for players to find out. But like, he and the rest of his society absolutely believes it, and he's not even mad. Like, he's not even bitter. Like, he's like he's fatalistic. He's resigned to it. It's just like, well, I guess here they are, the people who'll kill me. It's not even their fault. Like, they don't have a choice in it either. Like, he has no enmity for you, but it's like, yeah, you're the guys who'll kill me.
So I'm so curious how that's gonna play out, because my gut reaction even if I ran this for my players, it'd be like, no, they're gonna break fate. Like, that's their whole MO, right? They're like, no, we can change the rules of this game. Like, we don't have to. He doesn't have to die, right? He seems like a chill dude. Like, I don't want to kill a chill dude. Like, damn.
Well. I mean, I guess they'll have to play the game and find out whether it's possible to defy fate. But yeah, that's another character that we came up with, and it's just like, oh, we made this very cool NPC. Just mechanically, he's a very cool NPC, and it's like, what do we like? This guy needs a backstory. It's just like, sometimes we create just a cool NPC, and it's like, this guy at least needs a unique call sign. And then sometimes it's just like, no, this guy needs a fucking backstory. And yeah, so like, that's one advantage of like mechanics first, because it's like, you think you're just designing an NPC, and no, you're actually designing a character. And like, I guess that kind of speaks to the fact that, yeah, like, at the end of the day, everyone in those mechs is a person with their own hopes and dreams. Even if they're bad people, they're still people. And like, this guy, and this guy in particular, isn't a bad person. He's just a dude who is fulfilling his destiny as he sees it.
It is. No, for sure. I think that's one of the cool parts why people play Lancer, I guess mechs in general. Like, the idea of like a mech pilot game is that it's that drama of like, this person in the pilot seat has his own ideals, and you're fighting against them, and it's kind of cool. I mean, I think I like to remind my players a lot that if you take down a pilot, they had friends and family too, right? Like, they're gonna say their last words and call you guys villains and curse your names as they die, right? Because that's how real people are.
I wanted there to be a mix of types of villain in this story, which is that like, some villains are villains, or they're not even villains. Some are just opponents. Some people are against you because you're on different sides of a war, and they don't really hate you. They don't have any enmity for you, but someone has to win and someone has to lose this fight. And this fight if this fight can't be prevented, that's a tragedy, but they will still fight you. And some people are, and some of the villains are villainous. They are doing bad things, but you can understand like, why they think that's necessary, why they are doing this, how they got this way. And some villains are just irredeemable assholes who it's fun to punch.
Yeah.
And I think like, all those types of enemy can coexist. It's like, enemies who have motivations exactly as righteous as yours, enemies whose motivations are not righteous but are understandable, and enemies who are just irredeemable. Like, they can all coexist, and I think it's good to have a mixture so that players don't always feel like, oh, I wish we weren't fighting people I cared about so much.
I know, right? Yeah. I think you just don't get that with like a fantasy setting a lot of the times, because all of the enemies are always coded to just be bad guys, like, just without redemption, right? Without like thinking or feelings. They're just like, here's the goblins. They're dicks. You gotta go stab them, right? Like, that's just how it is. But I like that. There's way more room to explore in this setting, and there's cool people like you who are able to write all those cool, awesome characters, right?
I think Baldur's Gate 3 tried to be a little bit more nuanced about how like certain types of fantasy species. They tried to they tried to portray they tried to not lock an entire species to an alignment. I feel like they could have tried harder. Like especially with the goblins, like that was not their best work. But like I did appreciate that they were trying at points in Baldur's Gate 3. That like I don't want to get sidetracked because I could talk for literal days about Baldur's Gate 3, but I felt like there was like the foundation of a way you could do a more nuanced take on fantasy tropes in Baldur's Gate 3, and I like that. But yeah, I really do like how Lancer, most of your enemies are just people in mechs. And sometimes they're dimensional horrors. Like, sometimes they're dimensional horrors, but, like, most of the time, they're people in mechs.
Yeah, and, like, to be fair, sometimes I root for the dimensional horrors, too. Like, I get it. Like, why? like, I understand what you're doing, too, Mr. Man, who's half tentacle monster, half math program, right? Like, I get it. like... But I
still think cool. No description of NHPs goes harder than, again, this is a quote that I really wish I knew the genesis of. You put a hurricane in a jar and you painted a smiley face on the jar and you talk to the smiley face. And the smiley face talks back, but the hurricane is still in the jar. And that was the best, that was the description of NHPs that went the hardest.
Yeah, that is so freaking right. You know, there's two pieces of artwork that I've seen. I think from it definitely is in Legionnaire. I forget.
Legionnaire is so good. That's
yeah,
Catherine Stark.
So okay.
I really hope I've gotten that right.
Calvin, double check it in the edit.
Yeah, I'll put links to stuff below. Don't worry about it. Yeah, it is Catherine Stark.
Okay, awesome, cool, thank you, Catherine. But yes, it is the one where there is a subaltern unit, and from the subaltern unit is just a cloud of eyes, just like floating nebulously behind it, like it's coming through it. And I was like, yes, that is a math monster inside of that friendly ass looking robot. And then there's another picture, I forget, I think it might be like a fleet battle or something. But it is the projection into subspace of all of the networked NHPs, the ship NHPs, working together and fighting the other ship's NHPs, and they're just like deific gods clashing in cyberspace.
It was very kill 6 billion demons.
It is that, and I was like, this is exactly what I envision every time. During our last Lancer stream, I think that's the last time we really ran Lancer. Every time there was an NHP, I was like, I think it'd be funny if like the virtual representation of like when someone activates it is like actually a character larger than life showing up at everybody else's screen to like really reinforce that like they might be a program, but like they affect the real world very, very deeply. And it's like the idea that human beings are so good at basically changing dynamite into something that's mundane. That's the scary part, right? Like at any moment it could just explode and rip the universe in half, and be perfectly content with doing it.
I've always envisioned the way the Blackbeard's Sekhmet NHP manifests as just like spectral arms bursting out from the sides of the like extra sets of spectral arms bursting out from the sides of the mech, wielding ghost copies of their weapons.
Yep. That is actually the exact idea I had when I had to envision like what Sekhmet could look like. I think I went with just like an image I found online of a very strong and capable looking 6-armed woman, and I just basically overlaid that on top of the Blackbeard mech that Calvin was actually piloting.
Yeah.
Which is hilarious because the person piloting that mech, this character, was not that kind of bloodthirsty person. I think they were kind of inspired by your character. Vex. It was they were a streamer, and a very kind streamer at that, right? Just
Yeah,
out
she
there
became
having
a
fun.
streamer afterwards. I was like, at first it was more like a sort of grungy mechanic kind of person, but I think something sure happened during a downtime, where we had some sort of official sponsorship, and I was like, okay, I guess I'm a streamer now. That was between like the first and second one that happened.
Yeah, no, it was cool.
Just hearing that talk of NHPs, like that is something that I really want to get into with the Lancer setting. That's something that I feel like is such an interesting story space, but me personally, I haven't delved very deep into it. I would love to hear like other people's takes on it and just sort of expand on that. We are. I just realized how much time we've been going for. I did have something, Vex, that I wanted to bring up because I know you wanted to talk about your writing team a bit as well.
Yes.
But I was super curious because you were talking about how in Act 2 it's structured so that you have all these different options of where you can go, but things are going to progress and get worse. And I was just so curious, like, how do you plan out writing something like that? That each thing is a ticking clock that you have to come back to. But when you come back to it at a certain time, like, it might just be a little bit more on fire than it was when you first saw it. Like, I was curious how you and your team sort of planned that out with regards to writing the adventure.
Well, so we take... So basically, there's a whole lot of NPCs involved in each arc. And they will make decisions on their own if you're not there. But because... So I have this rule in that NPCs will do things without permission from the player characters, but they will never be better than the player characters at their jobs. At doing the jobs that the player characters should do. So, if an NPC is called upon to do something, in the absence of the players, they will do it, but they will do it worse. They will not do as well as the player characters, which means that, like, when it comes time for something to happen and the players aren't there, an NPC will have to do it for them and will almost certainly mess it up. Because basically, to give one plot example, a sort of semi-major NPC from Act 1, Howl, who's kind of like a mech arena fighter, has just gotten tired of impact dynamics, and she is assembling a coalition to get rid of Roderick Steele and impact dynamics. She's done. She is completely done. And she will repeatedly ask the players to help her, to join her coalition, and basically lead the charge, since she sees them as the most competent fighters in Calliope, and that's pretty much justified. But there's, like, basically in the impact dynamics mission, it's kind of a linear mission. There's two places that you need to assault before you can launch the final attack on Impact Plaza. There's like a mech factory and a helium refinery, like a sort of reactor fuel refinery. And she needs you to assault both of them so that basically you can take those away from Impact Dynamics so they don't have access to them and that you can use them for your own benefit. If you're not there to lead the assault, she will just do it herself, but she won't be able to capture either of them. She will just have to, like, basically it's like, okay, I don't have the skills or the people necessary to do this myself. Just blow them up from orbit. And she blows them up from orbit, denying their use to impact dynamics, but she doesn't capture them. And that means that, like, so basically, as you progress through, like, Mission 6 and Mission 7 without doing her arc, she will make preparations for the assault on Impact Plaza, but she will do it worse. And if you finally join up with her assault on Impact Plaza, you'll be denied some of the resources that you could have gotten if you'd gotten to this earlier. And then in, like, the Harrison Armory arc, I mentioned briefly that there was, like, the opportunity to do, like, a false flag attack that gets the armory some emergency powers that their leader needs. that option goes away if you leave it too long, because it relies on a ship being in a repair station that you need to steal. And if you leave it too long, the repairs are complete and it leaves.
Right.
Yeah,
so like certain arcs are not available if you wait too long. Certain arcs are not available if you do it immediately. Like, there's a couple of mission arcs that don't really open up until mission 7, because like the factions haven't been in the system long enough and they just don't really notice you. But once you've defeated Smith Shimano, or you've like dealt with Harrison Armory, like the other factions are going to be like, holy shit, these guys are powerful. We should probably get them on our side. So they'll start making overtures to you in the later missions. So that will sometimes open up arcs that weren't available to you if you'd done the mission earlier. But the situation will be further advanced. Because like, as I said, we just basically worked out, like, if the players don't intervene, what starts happening? Like, with the Harrison Armory arc, for example, they have built a prison in which they are kind of rounding up fugitives from Armory Justice. And as the act progresses, if you don't deal with Harrison Armory, they start arresting more people. And meanwhile, they're also doing weird space-time research. If you leave that too long, the experiments start getting more and more damaging. So, and like SSC is searching for something on Amphion. They get closer and closer to finding it, but they also get more and more paranoid about people looking over their shoulder. So they start, like, they've been target locking every ship that comes near them. And they haven't been doing anything. They've just been like,
Yeah.
I got my eye on you. If you leave it too long, they might lose patience and start firing.
I see, yeah.
And like,
Yeah, I mean, I think that like feels really, yeah. I mean, like I'm just hearing about it and I'm stressed out. But like that's the idea. Like, that's the point.
well, the,
Right.
the thing is that it's all tracked by this very simple clock, which is called the catastrophe clock. It has 3 segments, and each of the segments is labeled. There's unrest, crisis, and then question mark, question mark, question mark.
Oh.
And if you like, that's what happens in mission 9. And I really can't talk about that at all without spoilers. But like I don't call it mission 9. I call it Act 2 finale. And I don't want to spoil what goes on there. But that's some serious shit. Actually, that's when all of that stuff I said about Wallflower. Oh no, I'm kind of a hypocrite because mission 9 gets dark.
You just all the fun charades are over. Now it's like, oh no, this is real.
Yeah.
Like, shoot, dude.
So I think that's everything I wanted to talk about, except my weird digression on Mass Effect. But that can probably wait till another time.
Yeah, we might have to bring you back another time so we can talk about Mass Effect and Baldur's Gate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because having just got to the end of Act 1 on that, I'm very curious what your perspectives are. I always want to hear other people's input on, especially games like Baldur's Gate that are so large. Like, I'm sure there's a ton of stuff that I've missed narratively that can give different context to things. And I want to hear what your perspectives are on those particular things. But it might have to wait for another time because... I was thinking of other stuff, but we should probably start winding into the outro since we're about like 90 minutes in.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks again for coming onto the show again.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, same, exactly. I really enjoy whenever we have someone on. I really enjoy, like, I love when people get to just talk about their perspectives and things they're interested in and things they're working on, because we always hear something new that we hadn't thought of before, and hopefully people also enjoy hearing that. But to roll into the outro, unless is there anything else that you wanna mention before we get into the end of the episode here, or should we perhaps save this for when the Act 2 Kickstarter launches?
Yeah, I still have absolutely no idea when that's going to launch, but Christmas rolled around. It's like, I don't want to launch a Kickstarter on Christmas, no. So it's probably going to be sometime. It's probably going to be sometime this year, hopefully the first half, but like, we'll see. But yeah, I don't think I have anything else to mention specifically, except that you can find me at VexWerewolf on Twitter, VexWerewolf on Tumblr, and VexWerewolf on itch.io. I'm VexWerewolf everywhere.
And we will also have a link below in the video description to In Golden Flame Act 1, as well as links to the work of all the other Lancer writers and creators that we've talked to on the show before. There's a whole bunch of awesome people down there that you should go check out, and we should probably check in with this year. That is definitely something that we have been talking about doing more of. Additionally, I want to give a shout out to the Untold Stories project channel, where I'm at regularly. I'll be there every Wednesday for the foreseeable future. They play a lot of Mutants and Masterminds over there, so if you're into superhero RPG stuff, definitely go check them out. They're some real good friends of mine, and I really love hanging out with those people, and getting to play games with them. Additionally, just to mention some channel stuff, there are live gaming streams on the channel. We're expanding to Twitch as well, which you may have seen earlier this week, by the time this episode comes out. As far as the ongoing gaming series that are happening right now, there is Control, Baldur's Gate 3, as was mentioned, and Mass Effect Andromeda, which has been a lot of fun to go through, and I've got a pretty tough boss fight that I have to deal with. Well, not boss fight, just a particularly frustrating guy. It counts as a boss fight if it's one frustrating guy, I think. But I think that's gonna do it for this episode. Vex, thanks again. Is there anything either of you want to say before we head on out of here?
I guess just thank you for having me again.
Yeah, and thanks for coming on, Vex. It's always a pleasure talking to you, and it's always a really good and interesting discussion for sure. And I'm very excited to experience part 2 as soon as Calvin runs part 1 for me. That would be great.
Oh, is this the trade?
The subtle hint there.
If I run In Golden Flame for you, will you finally run Wallflower for me, Ramon? Is that what we're doing?
Yeah, that's the game of chicken meat play, Calvin.
All right, we'll see who blinks first. All right, well, for all of our GMs and players out there, just remember to keep on winning with dice, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.